The late afternoon sun hung low over Maplewood Lane, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban street in Franklin, Tennessee. The air carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass and the distant hum of a lawnmower. It was the kind of neighborhood where kids rode bikes until dusk, and neighbors waved from their porches. At 62, Jack Harper was a fixture here. A man who could coax life back into any engine, his garage a sanctuary of wrenches, oil cans, and the crackle of an old radio playing Leonard Skinner. His hands, weathered but sure, moved with the confidence of decades spent solving mechanical puzzles. Most folks on Maplewood knew him as the guy who'd fix your Chevy for a fair price, always with a story about his days tinkering with muscle cars. Few knew the weight of his past, the 25 years in covert operations, the missions that left scars he never spoke of, the commendations locked away in a dusty ammo box under his workbench. Jack liked it that way. He'd traded the shadows of his old life for the steady rhythm of civilian days, judged by his work, not his classified file. His wife, Ellen, 60, was his anchor. She'd stood by him through the sleepless nights, the years of silence when he'd come home from places he couldn't name, the slow rebuilding of a man who'd seen too much. Their brick ranch house, with its tidy flower beds and American flag by the porch, was their hard-earned haven. Jack spent his mornings at the local VA, mentoring younger veterans, and his afternoons teaching shop class at Franklin High, where he turned troubled teens into grease-stained dreamers. Ellen, with her quick laugh and knack for baking, was the heart of their cul-de-sac, always slipping cookies to the neighbors' kids. That Tuesday in October felt like any other. Jack was under Mrs. Callahan's old Ford pickup, swapping out a busted fuel pump as a favor. Ellen had driven to Kroger. Tuesday was double coupon day. The air was crisp, the first leaves falling. Then came the screech of tires. Too sharp, too urgent for Maplewood Lane. Jack slid out from under the truck, grease smudged across his knuckles, just as a black SUV roared into his driveway. 3 more followed, their doors flying open before they'd fully stopped. Men in tactical gear spilled out. Helmets, vests, rifles raised, moving like a swarm. "Police! Hands up! On the ground!" The shouts hit like a shockwave. Jack froze, his mind snapping to a place it hadn't been in years. Calm, calculating, assessing. He raised his hands slowly, the wrench still in his grip glinting in the fading light. "There's a mistake here," he started, voice steady, but a rifle barrel jabbed toward him, cutting him off. "Down. Now." Jack complied, lowering himself to the concrete, the cold biting through his flannel shirt. Boots thudded around him, radios crackling with clipped commands. "Clear the perimeter," one officer barked. "Secure the house," another yelled. Zip ties bit into Jack's wrists, pulled tight behind his back. He didn't resist, didn't flinch, even as the gravel pressed into his cheek. Through the chaos, he heard a familiar engine. Ellen's silver Honda pulling into the drive. His heart tightened. She stepped out, 2 grocery bags cradled in her arms, her face creasing with confusion as she saw the scene. "Jack? What's—" "Drop the bags. Hands up." 3 rifles swung toward her, red laser dots dancing across her sweater. Ellen, her graying hair pulled back in a loose bun, stood frozen, the bags trembling in her grip. "Please, I'm just—" she stammered, her voice soft, bewildered. "Ma'am, drop 'em now," a young officer shouted, his voice high with adrenaline. Jack's eyes locked on him. A kid, barely 25, his finger twitching near the trigger of a taser. "She's my wife," Jack said, his voice cutting through the noise, sharp but controlled. "She's got groceries. Let her be." "Shut it, old man." The officer's boot pressed harder into Jack's back. Ellen's hands shook, her arthritis slowing her as she tried to lower the bags. "Non-compliant," the young officer snapped, stepping forward. Before Jack could speak again, the taser fired. 2 prongs sank into Ellen's chest. Her body jerked, a gasp escaping as the voltage ripped through her. The bags slipped from her arms, crashing to the pavement. Milk cartons burst, eggs shattered, apples rolled under the boots of the tactical team. Helen crumpled, her small frame hitting the ground like a discarded doll. The air went still, the only sound the fading crackle of the taser and the faint spill of milk pooling on the concrete. Jack's pulse thundered, but his training held. decades of discipline locking his rage in place. He didn't scream, didn't thrash. His eyes found the commander, a man in his 40s with a silver bar on his vest, standing a few feet away. Jack's voice was low, deliberate, each word a blade. Call General Mason Creed, right now. The commander blinked, caught off guard. The team around him didn't move, their rifles still trained, radios still buzzing. The young officer who'd fired the taser sneered. What's that supposed to mean, Grandpa? We got a warrant for Javier Torres, drug runner. Save your name dropping. Jack's gaze didn't waver, still fixed on the commander. This is 221 Maplewood Lane. You want 221 Boulevard. Wrong zip code. Wrong man. His voice stayed even, but the weight of it made the air heavier. Cut these ties. My wife needs me. She's got a pacemaker. The commander's jaw tightened, doubt flickering in his eyes. Check the address, he ordered, his voice quieter now. One officer scrambled to a tablet, fingers fumbling. Jack spoke again, his tone unyielding. Inside my jacket, left pocket. Look, don't touch. The commander hesitated, then stepped forward, gloved hand reaching into Jack's flannel jacket. He pulled out a worn metal badge, its black eagle emblem glinting faintly. The older officer nearby sucked in a breath. Sir, that's not standard issue. That's Black Ops clearance. Tier 1. The commander's face paled. Medic, he shouted, snapping the team into motion. Cut his restraints. Jack's wrists were freed, and he was at Ellen's side in seconds, his fingers checking her pulse, with a precision that betrayed his past. Her breathing was shallow, but she was alive. The team around him faltered, their earlier confidence unraveling. One officer was on his radio, voice urgent, confirming the address error. Another pulled up a database, his screen flashing with restricted files. Jack didn't look at them. His focus was Ellen, her hand limp in his. You hit the wrong house, Jack said, his voice flat but searing. You didn't check. You didn't think. You tased a 60-year-old woman with a heart condition over groceries. Across the street, a neighbor's phone caught every second, the video already destined for the internet. The commander, helmet now off, approached, his face ashen. Sir, we had intel. You had nothing, Jack cut in, his eyes lifting to meet the man's. You had a trigger-happy kid and a bad address. Ellen stirred, her eyes fluttering open, pain and confusion clouding them. Jack, she whispered. I'm here, he said, his hand steady on hers. We're going inside. Your team stays out here, and you call Creed now. The team parted as Jack helped Ellen to her feet, her steps shaky but defiant. Whispers rippled among the officers, database hits confirming Jack's name on lists they weren't cleared to see, a ghost from operations they'd only heard rumors about. They'd come for a drug dealer. They'd found a man who'd once been a legend, and they'd hurt the woman he'd sworn to protect. As Jack guided Ellen toward their front door, the scattered groceries lay abandoned, a silent accusation under the fading Tennessee sun. The fading light of the Tennessee sunset bathed Maplewood Lane in a soft orange glow, but the air was thick with tension, the kind that clings to your skin like humidity before a storm. Jack Harper knelt beside his wife, Ellen, on the cold concrete of their driveway, his calloused fingers pressed gently against her wrist, counting her pulse. Her breaths were shallow, her face pale under the bruises blooming where the taser prongs had struck. The scattered groceries, shattered eggs, spilled milk, a lone apple bruised under a SWAT boot, lay like evidence of a war zone in their quiet suburban haven. The tactical team stood frozen, their rifles still raised but wavering, as if the weight of Jack's 5 words had anchored them to the ground. Call General Mason Creed, right now. His voice, low and unyielding, cut through the chaos like a blade, each syllable carrying the authority of a man who'd faced worse than this and walked away unbroken. The SWAT commander, his silver bar glinting on his vest, stared at Jack, his professional mask cracking. Doubt flickered in his eyes, a man suddenly aware he'd stepped into something far bigger than a routine bust. The younger officer, the one who'd fired the taser, shifted nervously, his bravado replaced by a sheen of sweat on his forehead. You're bluffing, old man, he muttered. But his voice lacked conviction, drowned out by the crackle of radios and the murmurs of his team. Jack didn't blink, his gaze locked on the commander. "Check my jacket. Left pocket. Now." His tone wasn't loud, but it was the kind of command that made men move, the kind forged in places where hesitation meant death. The commander hesitated, then stepped forward, his gloved hand reaching into Jack's flannel jacket. He pulled out a warm metal badge, its black eagle insignia catching the last rays of sunlight. The older officer nearby, a grizzled veteran with lines etched deep in his face, sucked in a sharp breath. "Holy hell," he whispered, stepping closer. "Sir, that's Black Ops clearance, Tier 1. I've only seen those in training manuals." The commander's face drained of color, his fingers tightening around the badge as if it burned. He looked back at Jack, who hadn't moved, his hands still steady on Ellen's wrist, his eyes never leaving the commander's. "You heard me," Jack said, his voice a quiet storm. "Call Creed and get a medic for my wife. She's got a pacemaker, and you just sent 50,000 volts through her." The words landed like a gut punch. The young officer who'd fired the taser flinched, his hand dropping to his side, the taser clattering to the pavement. His face crumpled, the bravado of youth replaced by the dawning horror of what he'd done. Ellen's eyes fluttered, a soft moan escaping her lips as she tried to sit up. "Jack!" she whispered, her voice fragile, like glass about to shatter. "Stay with me, Ellen," Jack said, his voice softening for her alone, a tender contrast to the steel he'd just shown. "You're okay, I'm right here." But his eyes flicked back to the commander, and in them burned a fire that promised reckoning. "You've got 10 seconds to make that call." The commander fumbled for his radio, his hands shaking as he barked orders. "Give me a secure line to Central Command. Priority 1, General Mason Creed." The team around him shifted uneasily, their rifles lowering slightly, the air heavy with the realization they'd stormed the wrong house, targeted the wrong man, and hurt an innocent woman whose only crime was carrying groceries. Across the street, a neighbor's phone continued recording, the lens capturing every second of the unfolding drama, destined to ignite outrage across social media. The medic finally pushed through, dropping to his knees beside Ellen, his kit open before he even hit the ground. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice urgent but gentle. Ellen nodded weakly, her hand clutching Jack's, her wedding ring glinting faintly against his grease-stained fingers. Jack's mind raced, not with panic, but with the cold clarity of a man who'd navigated jungles and war zones, who'd stared down enemies and walked through fire. He'd left that life behind, buried it deep to build a new one with Ellen, to be the man who fixed cars and mentored kids, not the one who carried ghosts. But now those ghosts were clawing their way back, stirred by the sight of his wife crumpled on their driveway, her dignity stolen by a trigger-happy kid in a botched warrant. He didn't shout, didn't lash out. Instead, he let his past speak for him, the weight of it heavy in the badge now, trembling in the commander's hand. "Address is wrong," an officer called out, his voice tight as he stared at his tablet. "This is 221 Maplewood Lane. Warrants for 221 Maplewood Boulevard. Different zip code, sir." The commander's jaw clenched, his eyes darting between the tablet and Jack. "You didn't verify," Jack said, his voice low but laced with venom. "You didn't check. You stormed my home, terrorized my wife, and for what? A drug dealer who's probably long gone?" He rose slowly, helping Ellen sit up, his arms steady around her trembling shoulders. Her eyes, filled with pain and confusion, met his, and in that moment Jack's heart broke. Not for himself, but for her, for the woman who'd endured his nightmares, his absences, and now this. She didn't deserve this. No one did. The commander's radio crackled, a voice confirming the line to General Creed was open. "Put it on speaker," Jack said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The commander complied, and a deep, gravelly voice cut through the static. "This is Creed. Who the hell is this?" Jack leaned forward, his voice steady but carrying the weight of decades. "It's Jack Harper, General. Your boys hit my house, tased my wife, wrong address. I need you here now." The line went silent for a heartbeat, then Creed's voice returned, sharper now, laced with urgency. "Harper, Jesus, Jack, I thought you were. Stand by. I'm en route. The call cut off, and the commander's face went ashen, his authority crumbling like dry leaves. The team around him exchanged glances, their earlier confidence replaced by a creeping dread. Whispers spread, Jack's name pulling up hits in databases they weren't cleared to access. Files marked with warnings that made even seasoned officers swallow hard. They'd come expecting a low-life dealer named Javier Torres. Instead, they'd crossed a man whose name was whispered in the halls of classified briefings. A man who'd written the rules they'd just broken. Jack helped Ellen to her feet, her steps shaky but her grip on his hand fierce. She looked at him, her eyes wet with unshed tears, but there was steel in her gaze, a defiance that refused to be broken. "I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "Don't let them win, Jack." He nodded, his jaw tight, and guided her toward their front door, the SWAT team parting like a sea before him. The young officer who'd fired the taser stood frozen, his eyes wide with guilt, his hands empty now, his career likely over before it had begun. Jack didn't look at him. His focus was Ellen, the woman who'd been his home for 35 years, now violated in the one place she should have been safe. As they reached the porch, Jack turned back, his voice carrying across the driveway, calm but unyielding. "You stay out here," he told the commander. "You don't set foot in my house, and you pray my wife's heart holds up." The team stood silent, the weight of their mistakes settling over them like ash. The neighbor's camera kept rolling, capturing the moment. A quiet mechanic revealed himself as something far greater, his 5 words a thunderclap that would echo far beyond Maplewood Lane. Inside, Jack settled Ellen on the couch, an ice pack pressed to her chest, her hand still in his. Outside, the SWAT team waited, their bravado gone, knowing they'd awakened a force they couldn't comprehend. A man who didn't need to raise his voice to bring the world to its knees. The air inside the Harpers' modest ranch house on Maplewood Lane was heavy with the scent of antiseptic and the faint hum of tension that lingered like an uninvited guest. Jack Harper sat beside Ellen on their worn leather couch, her frail hand clasped tightly in his, an ice pack pressed against the angry red marks where the taser prongs had pierced her chest. Her breathing was steadier now, but each shallow inhale carried a tremor of pain that cut Jack deeper than any blade ever could. Outside, the SWAT team's vehicles cast long shadows across the driveway, their red and blue lights pulsing silently, a stark reminder of the chaos that had shattered their quiet Tuesday. The scattered groceries, smashed eggs, a milk carton still leaking onto the pavement, lay abandoned, a testament to the violence that had invaded their home. Jack's eyes flicked to the window where the commander stood, his helmet off, his face etched with the kind of dread that comes from knowing you've made a catastrophic mistake. The radio on the commander's belt crackled, a voice confirming what Jack already knew. "Sir, it's verified. This is 221 Maplewood Lane. The warrant's for 221 Maplewood Boulevard. Wrong zip code. Target's not here. Intel says Javier Torres moved out months ago." The words hung in the air, a confession of incompetence that made the younger officers shift uncomfortably, their rifles now lowered, their bravado replaced by shame. The commander's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to Jack, who hadn't moved, his focus still on Ellen. "You didn't check," Jack said, his voice low, each word a hammer striking steel. "You stormed my home, tased my wife, and for what? A ghost you didn't even bother to chase properly." Ellen's hand tightened in his, her eyes meeting his with a quiet strength that belied her fragile state. "Jack," she whispered, "don't let this break us." Before Jack could respond, the low rumble of an engine cut through the silence. A black SUV with tinted windows and military plates pulled up, its presence commanding the street without sirens or flash. The door opened, and General Mason Creed stepped out, his charcoal suit crisp, his silver hair catching the last light of the Tennessee dusk. At 65, Creed moved with the deliberate precision of a man who'd seen battlefields and boardrooms, his eyes scanning the scene with a cold, assessing calm. The SWAT commander hurried toward him, but Creed raised a hand, silencing him without a word. He strode toward the Harpers' front door, ignoring the officers who parted like reeds before a storm. Jack met him on the porch, the two men locking eyes in a moment heavy with unspoken history. Decades of shared secrets, of missions that never made the news, hung between them. Creed's gaze flicked to Ellen, visible through the open door, and his jaw clenched, a rare crack in his stoic facade. "Jack," Creed said, his voice gravelly but warm like a fire that had burned too long. "They told me you were out of the game." Jack's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "I am, until your boys brought the game to my doorstep." Creed's eyes narrowed, turning to the commander who stood rigid, sweat beading on his brow. "Explain," Creed demanded, his voice carrying the weight of a general who'd toppled regimes with a single order. The commander stammered. "Sir, we had a warrant, Javier Torres, high-level trafficking. The address." "Was wrong," Jack cut in, his voice steady but laced with a fury that made the air feel electric. "You didn't verify. You didn't think. You put my wife on the ground with a taser because a kid with a badge got jumpy." He gestured toward Ellen, who watched from the couch, her eyes fierce despite the pain. The commander opened his mouth, but Creed silenced him again, his gaze shifting to the young officer who'd fired the taser. The kid stood apart, his face ashen, his hands trembling as he stared at the pavement where Ellen had fallen. "You," Creed said, pointing. "Step forward." The officer obeyed, his steps faltering, his eyes wide with the weight of his mistake. "Your gear, now," Creed ordered. The young man fumbled, removing his tactical vest, sidearm, and badge, placing them on the hood of a squad car. His hands shook so badly the badge clattered against the metal. "You're done," Creed said, his voice cold. "Report for reassignment." "And pray you never cross paths with me again?" The officer nodded, his shoulders slumping as he retreated to a patrol car, his career crumbling before the eyes of his team. Creed turned back to Jack, his expression softening, though his eyes carried the weight of their shared past. "You wrote the civilian engagement protocols, Jack," he said, loud enough for the SWAT team to hear. "The ones this team ignored. You saved lives in places I can't even name. And this is how they repay you?" He shook his head, disgust evident. "This ends now." He reached into his suit jacket, withdrawing a sealed envelope, its edges crisp, official. "This is a formal apology from the department," he said quietly, his voice meant for Jack alone, "and reinstatement of your clearances. We need you, Jack. The world's still a mess, and men like you don't get to retire." Jack's eyes flicked to the envelope, then to Ellen. Her gaze met his, steady despite the bruises, the pain, the violation of their sanctuary. She shook her head slightly, a silent plea. Jack turned back to Creed, his voice calm but resolute. "The world's always been a mess, Mason. I served my time. My fight's here now." He glanced at Ellen, his hand tightening around hers. "With her. With the kids I teach, the cars I fix. You want a soldier, find someone else." He didn't touch the envelope, letting it sit on the porch railing, a symbol of a life he'd left behind. Creed studied him, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You're sure?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Jack nodded once, his jaw tight. "I'm sure." Creed placed a hand on Jack's shoulder, a rare gesture from a man who rarely showed emotion. "Then take care of her," he said, glancing at Ellen. "And if you ever change your mind—" He let the words hang, unfinished, before turning to the SWAT team. His voice hardened, addressing the commander. "You'll answer for this, every one of you. Expect a full review." He strode back to his SUV, leaving the team in stunned silence, the envelope untouched on the railing. Inside, Jack settled Ellen under a blanket, her hand still in his. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to." Jack shook his head, his eyes wet but fierce. "You did nothing wrong, Ellen." "They did." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle, a stark contrast to the steel he'd shown outside. "We're going to be okay." But as he spoke, his eyes flicked to the window where the SWAT team was packing up, their movements hurried, their confidence shattered. The neighbor's camera across the street kept rolling, its footage already spreading, a spark that would ignite outrage and questions far beyond Franklin. Jack knew this wasn't over. The envelope on the porch was a door back to a world he'd sworn to leave, a world that didn't let go easily. He thought of the kids at Franklin High, the veterans at the VA, the life he'd built piece by piece with Ellen. But he also thought of the badge in his jacket, the weight of his past, and the power of 5 words that had stopped a SWAT team in its tracks. As Ellen's breathing steadied, her hand warm in his, Jack felt the pull of 2 lives, one he'd chosen and one that refused to release him. Outside, the SUV's engine roared to life, Creed's taillights fading into the night. Jack didn't move, but his mind churned. What came next wasn't just about him or Ellen. It was about a system that had failed, a world that needed fixing, and a man who might have to decide how far he'd go to protect what mattered most.